When you removed the cornerstone, you created a new galaxy. Every person and every world will be different.
LEGO Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy remixes Star Wars canon in some pretty crazy ways, and we need to sort through all of it, and I have the perfect guys to do that with us, Benji, Samit, Dan Hernandez. The first thing I want to start with is kind of a turbo nerd question. This is the kind of thing that I think about. The reality of LEGO Star Wars. Is that its own discrete reality? Like, if I walked through a door in the world between worlds, could I walk into the world of LEGO Star Wars?
You know, that's a good question.
It's a provocative question.
I know, I start tough.
Maybe the best way to think about it is that I think that they're in parallel. I think that there's reflections in both the canonical Star Wars galaxy that we're familiar with, and then there's sort of the LEGO Star Wars galaxy that's sort of traveling along. You know, if a Corellian freighter leaves Coruscant at 9 parsec, you know, whatever, I don't know. But I think that they're kind of traveling like this.
Yeah.
And I think
Right,
that
the standard LEGO Star Wars universe timeline is more or less in sync with what one would call canonically Star Wars, but you know, with a little more humor and fun and zaniness and all that you can expect from it. But then we, of course, blow all that up.
Oh, yeah.
And create a whole new LEGO Star Wars galaxy, which is, yeah, very distinctly different.
But I do think that the things that do translate across galaxies are, and this is some of the things that we talked about, are the spark of heroism in certain characters, the spark of goodness or badness, or the potential to be corrupted, or the people that are sort of on the crossroads that could go either way. You know, and I think that sort of those innate character type things.
All of our characters, even in our new version of the galaxy, it's still the character that we know and love, but what if their life took a different path? What if, you know, they gave in to the dark side? What if they embraced the light side? But we wanted to still stay true to who they are.
And I would say the other thing that I think is definitely cross-applicable is the Force.
Yes.
And how the Force functions, the way that you access the Force, how it interacts between everyone. I think that those things were very important to keep consistent because it's the foundation of Star Wars, in my opinion, and I think that having that really solid base allows you to kind of veer off into more unexpected paths, but it always feels like Star Wars.
We're losing power, we're gonna crash!
Jumping off of the idea of the Force, the way that you get into a lot of how the galaxy gets rebuilt in the first place is by this concept of a Force builder, of somebody that has this power to change the world. Can you talk about the ways that those sort of abilities marry the ideas of Star Wars and LEGO?
Force building as a concept is something that, yeah, really is meant to marry those two things together. LEGO is all about building and playing, and in this LEGO Star Wars universe, like, what power would a Force user have? The ability to build things. So we've got Force builders and we've got Sith breakers, you know, building and breaking. That is the cycle of LEGO.
I think it also makes sense with the nature of the Force. It binds us, it connects us, it flows through all of us. And so what you have the opportunity to do with the literal LEGO bricks is you can see the way that it's built together. You can actually break things down into their component parts. And it is, I think, a physicalization of sort of the more metaphysical qualities of the Force, which is like, I guess, a very heady way to think of it, but that's how I think of it a lot of the time. And so it's both literal in the sense that there are actual bricks being built in this version of the galaxy, but it also speaks to, I think, the way that the Force functions and the way that there's a constant process of creation, and part of creation is also destruction and the falling apart, the building it back. You know, these are things that sort of are functioning almost, not subliminally, but, you know, sort of, it's not necessarily the first thing that you think of when you think about the Force and how it functions, but for a LEGO Star Wars special, that was very specifically what we had to think about because of how it's physicalized and how the Legos function, and we spent a lot of time figuring out the rules of Force building and Sith breaking, and some of which is in, you know, Freemaker Adventures and some of other LEGO Star Wars content which we love, Other touch points would be like all of the great Lego Star Wars games, you know, the Skywalker saga and some of that stuff, which I found, which I played even predating us doing this, but I always found the way that the Force powers interacted in those games was really compelling. It was visually dynamic. It was problem solving in a lot of the times. And we felt, oh, there's some moves from that we also want to take in, which is what can we do in a Lego Star Wars special that they couldn't necessarily do in a different version of animation or in a live action special.
Well, there's this sense of emergent adventure that comes out of both of those things. It's anything can happen within this context. So it must have been freeing. Were there any times where you were able to write yourselves out of corners thanks to Lego logic?
Yes, a lot of times. Yes. There's a sequence where they're sort of escaping from like a bad guy's base, and as we're writing it, we're going, well, how are they gonna get out of this base? Like, they seemingly are completely overwhelmed. And we said, well, you know, they can change the physical qualities of the place itself. They can build walls. They can turn laser cannons into other physicalizations of those things.
In a world where everything is made up of the same component Lego bricks, you can rearrange anything and help save the day.
But at the same time, because our main character, Sig, is still learning his powers, it doesn't feel like he's OP, you know, throughout the entire thing, because when you start to extrapolate out, it's like, well, if you could rebuild anything at any time, you'd be exceptionally powerful. And you can get to that place in force building, but we start with someone who's very much at the beginning of that journey. And so he is still learning how to utilize those powers, and by the end of the Force episodes, he's kind of come into his own a little bit more, and he's sort of and I think that's also a big part of Star Wars, is that leveling up period. And it's there in A New Hope, and it's there in Force Awakens, and it's there all throughout. It's that gradual embracing of the Force and what it means to be a Force user, and how to utilize the Force and how to not utilize the Force, and all of those sorts of things. So it's all present in the show, but with that added component of you can kind of create or break down anything. And so it did provide a lot of opportunities for us to like get ourselves out of corners where we go, wait, why did we write it like this? What a mistake. Who wrote this?
My galaxy is the home of the most epic story ever told.
We were talking about the timeline a little bit earlier, and is this the first time that we've ever gone past Rise of Skywalker on the timeline?
I believe that it is the first time.
That's pretty wild.
It is wild, and it was something that there were discussions.
Yeah,
there were some discussions.
What went into...
It's removed from, you know, a lot of the core world and core timeline that's happening. So we didn't want to step on anything that could happen in the future, but it was important to us that our protagonist knew about everything that has come before. And so that made it had to take place afterwards.
You know, Sig, who is our main character, is played by Gaten Matarazzo, who's absolutely unbelievable and like the nicest person in the world, and a huge Star Wars fan. He brought the energy of a real fan who had really studied everything. And, you know, I've often made the joke, like, I can't roller skate, I can't ride a bike, I can't really do any of those things that kids sort of learned at a formative age. But what I did do with my time during my youth was I studied the Star Wars Encyclopedia. In many ways, this character of Sig, our protagonist, is a surrogate for people who know this stuff, who really know it. And then for that person to suddenly find themselves in a rebuilt galaxy where everything is different, it felt more shocking, it felt more dramatic, but it was a little bit of an invitation to people like us who know all this stuff to say, it's different. And we're all gonna be taking this adventure together as Sig is taking this adventure. And I think that was something that we felt really was exceptionally important. And thankfully, Lucasfilm was completely on board with it. And so yeah, it's the first piece of content post Rise of Skywalker, which is pretty amazing.
Let me see if I have this right. In your galaxy, my dad is mostly evil until he turns good for like 5 minutes and then dies. My own nephew betrays me and kills most of my best friends. And I spend decades alone until I use the Force so hard that it kills me?
This gives me a great way to get into my next question, which is one of the craziest ways that you represent a famous Star Wars character here, which is Luke Skywalker, and Mark Hamill is back as Luke, which he's so good in this. He's also credited as a consulting producer on the show.
He's incredible. He is everything that you want him to be. First of all, he's one of the most talented voice actors of our ever. He's the best of the best of the best. But in addition to that, he knows Star Wars like no one else.
Yeah.
And so we'd have meetings with Mark and we'd say, about the script or about his point of view on what a new version of Luke might be like. And he had real thoughts and they were all great. Many of the things that he pitched, and like I think almost every joke that he pitched, ended up in the script, and it wasn't us like trying to flatter him. It was us going, "That's a great Luke joke."
Right. He knows Luke better than any of us ever could. Yeah. We had a great meeting with him, just talking about Star Wars and him sharing stories of what it was like on set and hearing about it from a different perspective and a different angle. And he was so excited to do a different version of Luke that we haven't seen before, but it's still the Luke we love, but just with that little twist. It was just so wonderful that we were able to get him back for this.
One of the highlights of our career, if not the highlight, was he said, "I was so excited to do this because I read the script and I think you guys really know Star Wars." And that was
a moment.
I get emotional even thinking about it because it meant so much to me, because I think that for many people, not to get too serious, but my parents were divorced. I spent a lot of time in my room reading and watching movies and playing games and really caring about this thing that really carried me through a lot of my childhood. To hear that from Mark made me be like, you know what, whatever else happens in our career, he thought this was good.
We're gonna go from dream to nightmare fuel because we need to talk about another character and another actor that returns from the movies, and that is Darth Jar Jar.
Excuse me. Darth Jar Jar? Ridiculous.
The way that you guys ride the line between making him into a complete freak killer man, but he is still so quintessentially Jar Jar. What was it like working with Ahmed Best to modulate Jar Jar into a Sith Lord?
It was amazing. It was a very similar experience where he knows the character better than anyone. He's been through so much in his journey to it's amazing to see how everyone embraces him now. And there's been this fan theory for so long. The first thing we thought of was, well, this is it. We finally get the chance to do it.
And I assume going into the sort of lore of this fan theory, I think the idea, if my memory serves me right, is that because Jar Jar cedes emergency powers to Palpatine, he causes the fall of, maybe this is a totally separate fan theory. Jar Jar is wrapped up in some dark side.
Well, part of it. That is part of it, but it even starts prior to that, where he sort of positions, according to the theory, he sort of positions himself in certain places at certain times. He makes certain hand gestures that almost seem, why would he make a gesture like that? Could he be using the Force in some subtle way? Time is the great equalizer in a lot of ways, because I think that enough time has passed from the prequels to now that two things have happened. One, people who grew up with those prequels love them and are absolutely beloved, and that is to them the first Star Wars that they were exposed to. So all of the narrative about Jar Jar and some of the negative things that were said at that time,
holdovers from
a different time, a whole generation of people do not feel that way at all. The second thing I will say, you cannot appreciate what a brilliant performer Ahmed is and what a brilliant characterization that he brings to life until you see him perform it in the booth, physicalizing it, improving, moving, giving different takes. It was absolutely stunning to behold, and you realize how ahead of his time that performance was.
Yeah.
Because not that long later, you have Andy Serkis as Gollum, and a sort of a more refined version of the technology, I think, begins to emerge. But he was first, right? The first.
Yes.
And because of that, so many of the things that we now take for granted were invented by him in that moment. And so to be able to witness that firsthand, I think was extremely powerful, and also an extreme affirmation that this is a great character who should be and has now been embraced by the fans. And I think if there's one small thing that we've offered to sort of the greater Star Wars galaxy, it's let's get Darth Jar Jar in the mix. Let's see these things that we've wanted to see for a long time. And I think that hopefully for a younger generation of people who have who don't have as much context for this, they'll just be like, what a great and sort of foundational character Jar Jar is to all of Star Wars, and that's how we feel.
These are going to hurt you, sir.
I want to end with this because Rebuild the Galaxy is so funny with the way that it plays with Star Wars lore. I do want to know for each of you, what is your personal favorite funny moment from a Star Wars thing?
Cackling Salacious Crumb.
Thank you for reminding me of Salacious Crumb. We do need to stop back on one thing, which is that as the galaxy is being rebuilt, this is just it's very quick and it's not something that is dwelled on. But I do want to talk about the fact that like Salacious Crumb is the Supreme Chancellor in this new galaxy.
Who else would it be?
I mean, he's better than the last guy.
Quacky monkey lizards are very politically savvy. What is his platform?
He is pro
laughs.
Jabba slug. I guess he's pro slug.
Wants to laugh.
Yeah, he just wants to have a good time.
Dan, what's your favorite funny moment?
My favorite funny moment. Jimmy Smits as Bail Organa has one of the great line deliveries in all of Star Wars when he tries to, in Revenge of the Sith, go to the Jedi Temple as it's, as Order 66 is being operated, and they sort of block his way. Yeah. And I forget what
I know exactly
stormtrooper says to him.
Yeah.
Oh, he says, it's time for you to leave. And Jimmy Smits looks at it around, he kind of takes it and he goes, and so it is.
And so it is.
And he's like, bye.
Yep. Yep.
I know it's not necessarily supposed to be a funny moment,
but that's okay.
But I think that's part of what we're trying to get at in LEGO Star Wars is like, there's all these moments similar to that I think have accrued sort of a comedic value or sort of an identifiable, that it's like a moment.
That meme
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that for me is one that I remember just thinking, gosh, what a funny line delivery, what a funny moment within this very serious thing that's happening. And so I think Star Wars has tons of things like that, but for me, that's the one that I always think of because also I love Jimmy Smits. So
who doesn't?
I think that for me is one of my faves.
Unfortunately, the debate is not over.
Benji, Dan, thank you so much for coming in to talk about LEGO Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy. It hits Disney Plus on September 13th. Do not miss it. And for everything else Star Wars, keep it right here on IGN.